we're back again. So another project for the Cobra here. We're going to be adding some more gauges. So I have this pillar pod that was off my V6, and I'm going to repaint it first. So it's not quite the right color. I used a can of Duplicolor just from the parts store, and it's a little bit too light. I'll show you in a second. There is a wideband. There's a bung in the car still. So I have a boost gauge from Autometer, vacuum boost, goes up to 30 pounds. That is the ProComp Ultralight series. And then I have an AM wideband that is sort of in the car. The wiring is still there, but the gauge itself is not. And then I have an oil pressure gauge that I have from my V6 still that we're going to put in the pillar pod in the Cobra. But we're going to repaint everything first. So as you're probably aware, on these cars, the color of the interior is called dark charcoal gray. It wasn't a Cobra only interior color, but this is a bit too light, as you can tell. We compare it to the original A-pillar. There's the color comparison. So I'm going to repaint this one before I put it on. But you can tell it's not quite the right color, but it gives you an idea. I also have this interceptor gauge in the car, and it had a shift light, which you saw earlier. The interceptor gauge I'm going to leave, and we're going to add the wideband back in, which the wiring is still tucked under the dash, kind of over by my foot right there. For reference, the can on the right here is what I originally used on this pillar pod. This is Duplicolor vinyl and fabric. You can get it at any parts store. It's pretty close, and you can see it says charcoal gray, but not quite the right color. Me being a perfectionist, I'm going to repaint it. So I got this from Late Model Restoration. Shouts to them because they're great. And that is supposed to be dark charcoal gray. So I actually sprayed a test piece of metal I had laying around. And there we go. It's a little darker. It's hard to tell on the metal, but when you compare it to the car, it's a little darker, and I think it should match pretty good. So we'll see what it looks like on the actual plastic. I'm going to scuff it up with some 1200 grit sandpaper first so it adheres a little better, and then just run some alcohol wipes over it, get all the dirt off, and then give it some coats. Scuffed up, alcohol prepped. So there's your before. I'm going to take it over, give it a couple coats of the stuff from Lamar and see if it matches better. All right, so I hit it with 3 coats of the Late Model Resto dark charcoal gray match paint. It's pretty much dry now, so I'm going to take it and let's see if it matches better than it did before. Compared to the door, I'd say that's pretty dang close. All right, so here's the A-pillar. Here's the pillar pod. It's not perfect, but I'd say it's close enough. It probably needs to be a hair darker. I did 3 coats on this thing, so compared to the steering wheel, to the dash trim here, it's pretty close. It's better than it was. Like I said, I wouldn't say it's an exact match. It's still a hair lighter, I think. But close enough. All right, so I got a mess going on here, but I'm in the process of installing my gauge pillar pod, and we got 3 gauges. Wideband, the wiring for this is already in the car. We have boost gauge. This is a new one that I just got from Summit. This is the ProComp Ultralight boost vacuum. You can see it goes to 30 pounds on the one side. And then oil pressure gauge. I had this from my V6 still. Same gauge as the other one. So I'm going to start wiring all these up. I forgot previously I broke the bulb holder and the wiring for this gauge, so I had to order a new one. Luckily, Summit to the rescue. They got this to me in less than 24 hours. Gotta love it. Alright, so in terms of doing this gauge pod, I'm going to show you what you need. You're going to need a variety of things. Heat shrink. That's just to cover up your wire soldering. Basically creates kind of a watertight seal over the wires. You can electrical tape, but this looks nicer. Set of crimp stripper, wire stripper tools. These are cheap. You can get them pretty much anywhere. This is something you do not have to have, but is convenient. This is an automatic stripper. So basically, you put the wire in here. It grabs and pulls the insulation off, makes it a lot easier. Here's my gauge pillar pod. So I'm going to do what I had in my last car. So oil pressure, boost, wideband's going to go in the bottom. I just kind of have them set in there for now to get an idea of wire length. And then autometer, these gauges have bulbs. So each one comes with a illumination wire, which is the white, and a ground, which is the black. What I'm going to do, since they're going to sit in here, right, and in here, to make this a better installation process, I'm going to take this black wire, splice it to this black wire, same thing with the white wires. I'm going to chain them, kind of daisy chain them my way down. Once I get to this one, I'll do the same thing. I'll ground the ground for this one into these wires. Then I can run one wire underneath the dash to a ground point. That makes it less of a hassle. You don't have to wire a bunch of different things everywhere. I'm going to do the same thing with the power. So I am going to do these ones separate. These white ones are going to be the illumination wires for these bulbs. I'm going to run with a add a fuse. You can get these in any parts store, basically. This allows you to put two fuses in a fuse holder. So basically, you take the standard one, you put it in there, you put the add a fuse into the second hole. You run both off of the same section of the fuse block. I'm going to run these two wires, the illumination wires for the gauges, to the dimmer fuse underneath the dash. That way I can adjust the brightness of the gauges the same way you would with the internal dimmer for the dash. And then I'm going to take all the grounds, run those together, take the power for key on, which I will only need for really this one. Run that underneath the dash as well. And then the other things you're going to need some wire. I have red, I have black, I have green. You can get any color you want, it doesn't matter. You're going to need a soldering iron. This is a Weller. This was about 30 bucks on Amazon. I had a really cheap one before, and it sucked, so I bought a new one. You're going to need a pair of cutters, wire cutters, or dikes, if you've heard that term before, or if you just want to say the word dike. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to get to it. You may also want some energy drink. If anyone that watches my videos wants to send me some sugar-free Rockstar, feel free. Although Pepsi bought them out and the sugar-free ones don't taste as good anymore. But Rockstar in the white can. Send them to me if you like my videos. Here we go. So I literally despise wiring. It's just really tedious. It's not hard to do. I just don't like doing it. But we're working on getting all these wires ran for everything. So the wideband wiring was still underneath the dash. You can see it hanging there. I just need to figure out how much length I need, and then I'm going to zip tie the rest up underneath the dash somewhere. Moving up, that green wire, that is the sending unit wire for the oil pressure sending unit that is plugged into the car that you saw a little bit ago. And then that's the other portion of the wideband that I have hanging there. If you pop this kick panel off and then pull this trim back a little bit right here, you can kind of snake the wires up behind the dash up into the A-pillar area. And then I'm going to start soldering all these wires, kind of show you what to do to make a relatively clean install. All right, so something interesting, make this a little cleaner. So basically I have my 2 grounds from my light bulb wires, and then this is the ground with the crimp end on from the oil pressure sender gauge. And basically what I did, I twisted them all together. So I have the 2 silver wires are from the illumination, and then what I did is I actually took this 3rd wire, which is the ground for the oil pressure sender, and I stripped the insulation from kind of the middle of the wire, because I still need the length to go to the next gauge down, but I stripped the middle and I tied them all together. I'm going to solder that, and then now I have all of my grounds into one wire, and then I just have to go to the next wire and then down to ground it. So it makes it, you have less messy of an installation. Okay, so this looks like a mess, but the wiring is pretty much done for the gauges. So I'm going to, I stuck this on the floor. I'm going to kind of give you a rundown of what is occurring here. So this is the oil pressure gauge. So this is going to be the second one in the pod. So right here, this is the illumination wires for the boost gauge. That one's mechanical, so it literally only has a ground and a wire for the illumination. That ties in to the wire for the illumination and the ground for the second gauge, the oil pressure. Now this one is not mechanical because I don't want to run oil into the car. So you're going to see there's also a ground here and then a 12-volt ignition hot wire. All 3 grounds have been soldered together to run to one ground. This ground then comes down, comes down, comes down, get to here. So here, this is the harness for the wideband. You have the ground for the wideband. This is the ground that was tied together from everything else. And then this is the ground for my FireWire cable for data logging. So that's an extra step, but I wired that into the wideband. That way I can take that, plug it in to my tuner, which then plugs into the computer, and I can data log the air-fuel ratio on my computer if I'm data logging for whatever reason. Now we have the 12-volt hot. That's our red wire. That's going to run down. That's going to end up same thing. It's going to tie in with our wideband 12-volt hot. Something just fell over up there. And then that now has an add a fuse. That's going to plug into our fuse box. This blue wire off the wideband, don't need that for anything. I'm just going to tape it out of the way. And then finally, these 2 from the lights, from the gauges, this white wire, that's going to run down also to an add a fuse. That's going to go into the footwell fuse box as well to the dimmer fuse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure all this stuff works. I still need to run the line for the boost gauge, but basically that makes it so that there's only a couple of wires coming down from the A-pillar rather than a bunch of them, and it ends up being cleaner that way. So it looks like a mess now, but it'll work out. So this car still has the factory oil cooler, quotation marks, that is actually more of an oil heater than anything. But it does actually have a secondary port on the housing. So there's a little plug in there that I removed, which was a bitch to get out. It is a 1/4 inch hex, like an Allen key hex, and I had to use an Allen key with a 1/4 inch socket with a ratchet extension on the end to get enough leverage to get the damn thing out. But besides the point. So there's my oil pressure gauge sender plugged into the hole. For reference, that hole is 1/4 inch pipe thread, NPT. And then the oil pressure gauge sender is 1/8 inch NPT. So basically what I ended up doing, I went to Lowe's and Home Depot. I was hoping for a 45-degree angle one, but the 90 works and I couldn't find a 45. So what that is there is a 1/4 inch NPT coupler to 1/8 inch NPT female, and then the other end is what they call a street elbow, I think. Basically, it's male 1/8 inch NPT so that it would go into the plug that I just put in the hole, and then the other end is female, and then you just plug the oil sensor into that. So I just got to run my wire to that. I'm going to figure out something through the firewall. Totally different topic, but something else that was stupidly done on this car. So this car has some sort of aftermarket K-member. My light here, there you go. A little too much light. There you go. Has some sort of aftermarket K-member. I think it's a UPR one. I don't think I can get that oil filter off. You notice someone put a dent in the top of it. Apparently, we're not just not going to change the oil on this car. That's pretty stupid. I don't know. Whoever did that just was being cheap and didn't want to buy an oil filter relocation kit. So I think I am going to order, when I do the Maximum Motorsports K-member setup, because I'm going to switch these out, I think I'm going to order a oil cooler relocation whole kit ordeal and just get rid of that whole thing. But yeah, apparently can't change the oil, or I can change the oil but not the filter. I don't think that's gonna come off. That's definitely not gonna come off. Dumb shit when you buy a car. All right, final steps. You can see my wiring mess is now going into the A pillar. So tip. This is the original factory A pillar. However, this one is not from the Cobra. This is from just a random car. You can see I cut a hole in it. That hole is to run the wires down through. Just makes it a little bit easier from a wiring aspect. There's also another one. I don't know why there's two. I don't quite remember why. I think one of them was wrong. So the new pillar attaches to this pillar, and that all goes up in there. And you kind of tuck the wires in between the two, essentially, and then down. So keep finding things that make my life difficult. So I am pretty much done with the wiring for the gauges. I'm installing the vacuum line for the boost gauge. So in these Cobras, there is a factory boost gauge, right, in the dash. So there's a vacuum line that runs from the firewall from the engine bay through the glove box, back behind the stereo, and then to the dash. I was planning on just teeing off of that line to run my vacuum line and then kind of running that along over there. Well, I come to find out in the glove box it has already been teed off. There is a Hobbs switch for the fuel system. It has been vacuum teed into the boost line already. So now I'm basically going to need to add I'm going to add a Y here, so that I can add another boost gauge line in, basically. Always fun. Had to run to 3-part stores to find what I needed. So this project took me way longer than I anticipated, but I tried to do everything really cleanly. So here's my boost line. You can see there's the factory one here. There's the new one for my boost gauge. Zip tied everything on so it won't blow off. And then there's a Y there that goes into this other T that goes to the Hobbs switch. That's all tucked nicely behind the glove box. So I'm just going to tuck all that back in there. The boost gauge line, I ran it behind the radio. I'm actually going to be installing a different head unit, so I need to pull the radio out anyways, so just made my life easier. And then the gauges are pretty much done. I'll go over to the other side of the car. I'm going to start it up, make sure everything works. And we should be done. All right. Everything is hooked up. The gauges seemingly work. Lights. Dimmer. Wideband. I'm going to start the car up. Make sure it works. Bam! Wideband, boost gauge, oil pressure, everything seems to work. We done.